Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Living Well, 10-Minute Tips to a Healthier You. I'm Sandra Grenzi, Family and Community Health Sciences Educator for Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Hunterdon County. And our topic today is, what's a healthy eating pattern? So first, let's define an eating pattern in general. So an eating pattern is really the sum total of all the foods and beverages that a person consumes. It's different than some more restricted eating patterns, which may focus just on individual foods or certain food groups, or which may rely on supplements to get the same nutrition that you would ordinarily get from foods. So we're going to be talking about some healthy eating patterns today. And a healthy eating pattern generally includes a wide variety of foods from many food groups. So that could include fruits and vegetables and whole grains and dairy foods and lean protein foods and healthy fats. But a healthy eating pattern also may limit some of the more unhealthy components of a diet. So we'll talk about those at the end. But the Dietary Guidelines for Americans were just updated a couple of months ago. And you may not know that they are evidence-based guidance for consumers of all ages to keep people healthy. And they're updated every 5 years based on the most current science. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's in the current edition of the Dietary Guidelines. We'll talk about some of the key messages. So number one, big focus of the new Dietary Guidelines is the message to really make the most of every bite of food. So go for nutrient-dense foods. And in fact, we'll be talking a lot more about what are these foods next week. But in general, they are rich in vitamins, minerals, fiber, and other healthy components that are important for good nutrition. So that's one of the important messages. And another important message in the Dietary Guidelines is to really do it your way, to individualize your eating patterns into what works for you, because no two people are alike, and there are many different factors that influence what foods we eat and why. So there could be cultural reasons, there could be particular health reasons, other traditions, there could be economical considerations, and many, many, many more issues. But there is a way to eat a healthy eating pattern that really is individualized to you. So let's talk about 3 eating patterns that were highlighted in the Dietary Guidelines. And it's not an exclusive list. There are other healthy eating patterns. But these 3 are fairly mainstream now and really intended to promote good overall health for people of all ages. So the first one on our list is the typical American or U.S. eating style. The Mediterranean eating pattern was highlighted in the Dietary Guidelines, as well as the vegetarian eating pattern. So let's look at them a little more closely. So, typical U.S. eating pattern, you may be familiar with the components that make up my plate, that guide selections in the typical American eating style. We have foods from fruits, vegetables, grains, lean protein foods, and protein in this particular pattern can be animal-based or can be plant-based or can be a combination. And then the nutrition that is from the dairy foods such as milk and cheese and yogurt, where we get calcium and vitamin D. So this My Plate can be used to represent a typical American-style eating pattern. Let's look at the Mediterranean eating pattern. Now, you may have seen or heard a lot of information about the health impacts of the Mediterranean-style eating pattern, and there's extensive research in this particular style of eating. It's been highlighted for disease prevention, but also for just overall good health. So what makes it a little bit different? Well, there's a little bit more of an emphasis on plant-based foods. Protein sources are less about red meat, which is eaten much more sparingly, and animal protein foods might be more seafood and fish or poultry, and then also coming from eggs and cheese and other dairy foods. So more plant-based foods. Certainly, of course, I think one of the hallmarks of the Mediterranean eating pattern is the emphasis on healthy fats, such as olive oil. There's less of an emphasis on sweets and added sugars, so those are eaten more sparingly. And there's also a bit of a cultural component, I think, to the Mediterranean eating pattern, where physical activity is an important part of the lifestyle, the overall lifestyle, and also the importance of focusing on the meal, enjoying food, eating foods together with family and friends. So time set aside to enjoy meals. And the third eating pattern that was mentioned in the Dietary Guidelines, of course, is the vegetarian-style eating pattern. And that can involve several different sub-patterns. So it can include some amount of animal protein. So, for example, some people who are vegetarians will include eggs and cheese and milk. Some may include only fish and seafood and no red meats or poultry. And then, of course, on the one end of the continuum would be vegan diets or dietary patterns, which would have no animal protein at all. So the key parts of the vegetarian eating pattern are definitely more of an emphasis on plant-based foods. And then, depending on the subgroup, more or less of animal proteins or none at all. So a healthy eating pattern, in addition to those nutrient-dense and healthy foods, an overall healthy way of eating needs to focus on those things that should be limited or consumed in moderation. So we have on our list saturated fats that are known to be linked to heart disease, added sugars, which can contribute to, more than just cavities. It can take up a good portion of our calorie budgets and lead to obesity and really diminish the overall quality of our diets if we include too many added sugars and we're not looking at whole foods and enjoying fruits, for example. And then last but not least is sodium. Focusing on about 2,300 milligrams per day of sodium is a good target to keep a healthy blood pressure and to have good overall health. So we'll be talking more about how to include those healthier foods and how to limit the not so healthy foods in the next couple of episodes of Living Well. Actually, if you feel that your eating pattern could use some improvements, use some tweaking, we have discussed some tools that you already can use, such as the action planning, where you can take a large objective and break it down into smaller, more achievable steps. So think about what you might need to change in your eating pattern to ratchet it up to be more healthy. And next week, I hope you do join me next week, because we'll be talking about what exactly are nutrient-dense foods and how do we include them into our eating patterns. So I hope you join me next week. I promise it won't take more than 10 minutes, and I'll see you then.